Hello and welcome to Education in Focus, where today we will be considering transitions both inside and outside of school. Education in Focus is a podcast brought to you by Adoption Focus, and it is a space to delve into all things school and education related. My name is Leigh, and I'm the training manager at Adoption Focus. The education of our children is a real passion of mine, so it's a privilege for me to be joined by two of our education experts here at Adoption Focus, Jason Gilman Hughes and Lisa Biggs. Jason is our wonderful education advisor, and your background is primary education, isn't it, Jason?
It is indeed, yeah. Spent about 25 years-ish in schools, primary schools, in lots of different ones. I got as far as head teacher at one point, and that was an amazing experience as well. And but more recently, I've been a foster parent for about 5 years now. So I think that's quite an interesting perspective on things. Seeing what it's like from a parent's point of view with children who've been through a traumatic start to life.
That's great. Thanks, Jason. And our second expert is Lisa. Lisa is part of the training team here at Adoption Focus, supporting our adopters to navigate their adoption journey. And your experience is as a secondary school teacher, isn't it, Lisa?
Yes, it is, Lee. Yes, it is. I've taught from year 7 up to sixth form, predominantly as a maths teacher, but I've also done a little bit of PSHE and some psychology teaching as well. So, taught quite a few lessons in my time.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. So, just for you listeners, within Education in Focus, we will explore a range of topics and we would really welcome your suggestions, questions, and contributions. So, please feel free to drop us an email at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Some topics will be specific to adoption and the needs of our children, whilst others will be more generic. We'll never profess to be the experts on every school and every child, but will endeavour to offer different perspectives and give you the tools to support your child's education. So, today we're considering transitions within school, and I think we should start by talking about how do we support our children with that initial transition from home in the morning to school, because it's so important to bear in mind what separation means for our adopted children.
From a little one's point of view, from they're the ones that I think often really struggle. Potentially, there's I think from a parent's point of view and from the school's point of view, how we've worked things out. And so often things have worked out quite well. I think the first thing to say is, from a parent's point of view, is you've got to try and put on that face of being positive and confident as much as you can. Because whilst you might have the butterflies in your stomach, we've all got to try and keep, for the sake of our children, keep positive and say, yeah, it'll be fine, it's a lovely time. One of the things I think really works with little children, particularly younger ones, and it works all the way through primary, even in year 6, so it doesn't have to be not about just the 4-year-olds at reception here, but having someone who can meet and greet at the door or the gate is a really helpful thing to have. Particularly if the child's got someone they can relate to, or some member of staff that they feel they've got a good connection with, that really can help. And it can help that handover, and they sort of feel excited to see that person. They get a welcome. Oh, we've got this thing for you to do. Come on! And straight away they've got a distraction to go, and off they skip. Hopefully, that's often worked. I found better when there's been that other issue, because also the clinging to the parent is really difficult. That physical clinging to the clothes and not trying to pull them off, it's quite an awkward thing. That's quite embarrassing for everybody as well, I suppose. But as a parent, I think you're thinking, God, it was looking at me, and this child's screaming and clinging onto my clothes. But you're trying to avoid all of that stuff as possible. It's really difficult. If you can, I'd always say to parents, especially again at the primary level, as soon as that child looks like they're about to go in, or they've said hello to that adult, go quick as you can. Drop it, say goodbye, and disappear. Don't try and cling too long, because sometimes the longer you stay around, then the feelings come back and it becomes more difficult. It's almost like that ripping off the plaster thing. If it is difficult for you to do that, and even if you see a child looking slightly distressed, if you can go and just disappear for a little bit, you can arrange for things like a phone call from the school for a bit of reassurance to see if they settle in all right. Because quite often we found that some parents would get worried that they'd sent the child away. They still looked a bit nervous when they went off with the adult or into the school building, and they were just, for their own benefit, for their own sort of reassurance, they needed that little quick chat on the phone call, or even a message if they've got a messaging system that schools often have. Something just says, "Can you just agree that you'll let me know?" She's had a great start. It's been okay. quite often we found once children in school, once they got in to see their friends or they saw activities that they had ready to do, that it really got them engaged in what was going on in the here and now. So that bit of stress, often, most of the time, it disappeared very quickly. So that's quite good. Sometimes I found transitional objects can be helpful as well, particularly in those early days in the year. I've seen it again from both sides. We had one of our boys needed to have something to take with him. So I'm sure lots of people know about these strategies where you just give them an object that they can have that they take from home to school. Often a good things like some sort of fun key ring that can attach to the bag. So, it's not really got a lot of inherent value, but if it did get lost, which it could easily do, it's not really a massive problem. You could easily get another one, which it can help hopefully. But yeah, those sort of things can help. One boy I had, we had, he liked to have a little note in an envelope. So I used to write a little note each day and put it in his bag, so that he could open it. Usually around lunchtime, and it would. He didn't. He was in reception at the time, so he couldn't read it. But an adult would read it with him, and he'd say, "Oh, hope you're having a lovely time. Have a great lunchtime. Can't wait to see you when you get home later and find out what you've been up to." It's almost as if you can say to them, "You're still in my mind. You're still not forgotten." Because again, that's one of the big things for the children, isn't it? Feeling that they've not been forgotten by somebody, that they're still being held very much in your mind, even though you are doing it. They can't see that. There's all those classic things of, I think some parents have sewn something into the jumper or the lining of a coat. I don't know, you've probably heard that kind of thing, where it's like a little love heart or something where you can press it. It's like, press that will remind me I'm still here. It's a bit like that. There's a really good book called The Invisible String, which I don't know if anyone's ever read, but it's a fantastic one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Which
great.
is really kind of exemplifies that connection that you're saying I'm still connected to you, even though you're not in the same room as me. So, which is difficult for children because they can't always think in those sort of terms, but it's actually thinking of something that's bespoke to your child, isn't it? And what will make a difference. And I don't think any
Yeah.
school would really have an issue with any of those things, because it's certainly not going to cause any problems, are they? But a bit of perfume, or spray, if something that helps them remember you, bit of your spray on their jumper or something, they can sort of smell it every so often, just reminds them. Those sort of things can help them too. There's just lots of different things you can do. And I think it's supposed to just a case of talking to the school about what sort of things you'd like to try. And if you've not done it before, it's sometimes just trial and error. Some things will work, some things won't. Some things will work for a little bit and then stop working. Or after a while, like I sent our boy with the envelope, the notes, he decided after a while the notes kept coming home unopened because he didn't need them anymore. That's kind of brilliant. So we just kind of quietly stopped doing it, didn't say anything about it, but it's quite obvious that he's saying, I don't feel that I feel more settled. I don't feel the need for them anymore, which is lovely. So yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff you can do, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there who've already probably tried lots of weird and wonderful things that work for their children too.
No, I really like that. I'd like to just go back to something you said right at the beginning, which is kind of like to kind of put your game face on. So, even if you're feeling a little bit anxious and you're thinking, oh, I'm not feeling okay about this separation, it's kind of important that you get yourself in the right frame of mind. And certainly when we're doing our training to our adopters post placement, I hear a lot of people saying that they do find the mornings like very, very difficult with older children now. So I'm not thinking about the younger ones so much, think about the older ones. And actually, when we dig into that, what we're finding is that many of our adopters are feeling quite triggered about feelings of being late themselves. And that kind of heightens their emotions, and it heightens, like, or it informs how they deal with the situation in the morning, and things can become more fractious when we ourselves are feeling triggered. So I think just like linking into putting your game face on, I think I'd also just say, have a little think about how you're feeling in the morning. You're probably thinking, right, we need to do the school run, we need to get all the stuff ready, then I've got to go to work, or I've got another commitment that I need to do. And sometimes we can be very caught up in that and kind of pass on our hyped up anxiety onto our little ones. So anything that you can do to kind of lessen your own anxiety in the morning, I think will help with that transition from home into school. So even thinking like the night before, can you get school bags out? Can you get uniforms out? Can you make the lunches? Can you pick your battles? So maybe if your little one is, we want to send them into school having had a good breakfast. We want them to be fueled for the day. But actually, if they're having a morning when they're not eating, do you pick that battle, or do you just pack a few extra snacks for the playground, that they can have when they're ready? And I think a lot of the things that we can do to calm ourselves, whatever we're feeling, help us to put our game face on and help us to kind of make them feel a little bit calmer. Um, if your child or your children are struggling, and it does make them very, very anxious, sometimes little distraction techniques can work wonders. If you on the way to school and you can already tell they're starting to get a little bit ramped up and a little bit dysregulated, are there some fun things that you can do that will perhaps take their mind off it? So just thinking off the top of my head, have you ever played that game in the car, like I Spy Bingo? So you've got to spot for like a post box, a woman walking a dog, a blue car, something like that. So they've got to tick off 6 or 7 things, and they can get a little reward if they, manage to get a full. Obviously, you have to plan the bingo sheet that they will see everything that they need. You're not going to have a flying pig on there or anything, but it's just something that might help take their mind off it a little bit and help, inject a little bit of fun. That can sometimes the fun from that can carry them through the school gates. But again, just to reiterate what Jason said earlier, in secondary school, it's still okay to have someone to meet you at the gate. There are members of staff that will be there waiting, if you want them to be. Or there are many rooms within a school that can be signposted. So some schools have nurture rooms, they have little quiet rooms that a child can make their way to first thing in the morning and be greeted by a member of staff. But even if the school doesn't have that, the school library is always you know a little safe, quiet space to kind of ease that transition, so they don't have to go straight into the hustle and bustle. So maybe if you direct your little one to one of those, then they can have a little bit of time to get ready for the school day in there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's really nice. It reminded me as well that again, sometimes something we did in my school was letting children come in a different way. So if you really couldn't, if, we tried lots of other things first. You don't jump straight to this idea, but if we found they really couldn't manage the busy part of that morning when everyone else is coming in through the same door, there's coats and bags and there's cloakroom area. It's all a bit busy and a bit crowded and difficult for some children to manage. We just had 1 or 2 children who would come in through the main entrance through the office or something like that. So, or a different door where another member of staff would be ready for them, so they could just come in a bit more quietly, and it would be. That might even mean coming in a little bit earlier than the others, or a little bit later than the others by a couple of minutes. But ultimately, they're still going to be ready on time for the registration. So those things don't matter. And I think again, it's a case of not being too worried to ask for these things if you think it's going to help your child, and don't feel like you're being a pain and why does she have to be different from everyone else? But actually, your child's different. They might have different needs, and so that's perfectly okay. You're not asking anything that's totally out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and on that note of talking to the school, I think it's sometimes good to have a word with them about how you would like them to handle lateness, perhaps. So if you are having a difficult morning, perhaps that impending separation has been difficult, and that has made your child late. You want to know that the school are going to handle that appropriately. Some schools have very strict punctuality rules, not all of them, but some do. And the last thing you want after a difficult morning, you've managed, I'm thinking of the older ones, you've managed to get them in through the gates, they're on their way to the lesson. If the first thing that they get greeted with is being told off or having a break time detention because they're late, that's not going to help the situation. It's not going to make it any easier the next day. So, it might just be worth having a word with the school in advance and saying, my little one does struggle. Some mornings are fine, some mornings are very, very difficult. If she is 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, how is that going to be handled? What is going to be said to her? What is going to be the repercussions of that? And kind of talk the school through how they can support your little one getting into that first lesson.
Yeah, another good idea, like that. In fact, it reminded me of another thing that we did for a child once. And again, this is more exceptional, but still, it's still possible. If you've tried lots of things, and you may still find that there's a possibility the child's going to be late, and that's not because the parents are getting up late. This is still getting up early. There's one child that we had who, whilst being adopted, has also had some a physical condition, a long-term condition, which meant sometimes it literally was more difficult for them to be ready. And so we managed to put in place an agreement through where they could arrive within a sort of period of time. So yes, ideally you want to be there at the same time as the others, and they would always try to. But if they couldn't, because of any particular reason, rather than have to ring and feel embarrassed about every time, oh gosh, another morning, can't get ready the cars, etc., etc., or the phone's busy, because often it is that time of the morning. To save all of that hassle, we just said, look, as long as you're here by whatever time, a particular time that we felt reasonable for everybody, then it'll still be marked as she'll still be marked as here on time, and that's the end of that. So don't worry about it. And it was such a relief for everybody, really, because it stopped that anxiety for the parents, for the child, for for the school. Didn't have to worry about it. The teacher wasn't worried that they're going to have a late mark on their register all the time, saying, "Why have you got this child always late? What are you doing about it?" It just cuts all that out. And we had it in writing. I think it's very important to have these things in writing and with a defined amount of time, so it's all clear, not just a quick word that one person has said. I think it's really important to have those things written down, which might sound a bit formal, but I think it just helps keep it clear for everyone. And if you have a defined point, let's say we'll do this until half term and see how things are going, because it might be by that stage things are different. So the circumstances might change, and you can modify it back to something more standard for most children. But it may be that you have to continue it a bit longer, but that's okay. It's all in agreement, and I think it just helps everyone.
I think what I've found as well is that our children want to know about what our next transition is. So we're dropping them off at school. Where are we going then? And children might fill in the gaps and think we're going to do something weird and wonderful, when in reality we're probably just going to work. And if we are working from an office, not at home, I think what can be really helpful, I've found, I don't know how you two feel about it, but is taking our child or children with us to see where it is that we work. And oh, look, there's a picture of you on my desk. So even when I'm here all day and you're at school, I'm thinking of you. I found that to be helpful.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever thought of it explicitly actually until you said it. But my little one, she's 4, and she does tell me what I'm going to be doing after I've dropped her off. Actually, she just talk me through my day. Some of it is very accurate, some of it less so. It is easier for me because I work from home, but actually, yeah, she does say things like, "Oh, and then you'll get my clothes out of the washing machine." I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I will, sweetheart." And yeah, you're probably quite right. Have them having an image in their head of what we're doing, and that it will involve them on some level, is probably very useful. And the other thing that went off in my head when you were saying that is she's also very keen to know about the number of transitions that she's going to have until she comes back to me. So I've dropped her off today, and it's like, okay, so you're going off to breakfast club, and then you're going to go into school. It's a Monday today, if anyone's listening at a later date, and that is the routine on the Monday. Then my parents pick her up, and then I pick her up from there, and we talk through all of those transitions until she comes back to me. So she kind of has a pattern in her head, and she knows what's going to, how many things she has to do before she comes back, and that works quite well as well. Talking them back to that point when they will be back with you.
Well, that's really good, because I was looking at something I'd made notes of earlier, and I thought, as you were talking about that, Lisa, I was thinking, yeah, this is the next thing, isn't it, that could we come on to, which is actually, in a typical day, a child's going to have lots of little transitions, which each one of which could be a potential stress point for our children. So I was thinking, yeah, as you were talking about that, I thought, well, there are things that you can do. I mean, talking through what the child's expected to have that day is amazing, and they need the bigger picture so they can see where they are on that particular map of the day. Let's say, for some children, talking to them is great, and they can keep that in their head. For some children, it's too, they can't remember, they can't process it, so they might need something like a visual cue, and that's where people often suggest visual timetables, and that they can be really helpful in reassuring a child about what they're going to be doing that day. So if you think that's what your child needs, I think the school then could easily produce a simple visual timetable. People have them at home as well, don't they?
Yeah.
Bedtime, you get your little picture of a bath, and there's a bed, there's a book for you read, story time, etc., so they know what's happening. It can be very useful in schools too, so they can have timetables. And some of the classic things that schools might do is have a laminated piece of paper or card, and then a series of boxes that represent each activity, and then the child can have each picture stuck down, often on a bit of Velcro, and then they can as each activity finishes, they can rip that one off, and they can see what the next one is, and then can see the day physically as well as actually happening step by step.
That's a really nice idea.
And it can just help to see what's happening next. You can say, "Oh, we've just done that one, and right, let's take that off. What's the next thing on our list?" And they can say, "Oh, I think it's playtime. That's right, it's play." Or it might be milk time or something like that, or snack time if it's primary school. So if they know that's coming up, it just helps them remember. Okay, I know what it being predictable is so important, isn't it, for children who get anxious about changes. So yeah, those sort of things can be very helpful to them. A lot of classes in primary schools will have some kind of list of the day somewhere on the board. They often, or even little pictures of symbols they blue tack to the board, because they often find the whole class quite like to know what they're doing that day, including all the subjects they're doing and what's happening. So it can be very, very helpful.
And it's not that unreasonable, is it, really, to want to know what you're doing that day? You know, if I'm going to a meeting that's all day or something, an event, I want an itinerary, I want an agenda. And
Definitely. I want to know when
yeah,
lunch is.
when it's snack time. But it's, you know, especially for our children, then when inconsistency and the unknown has brought such difficult things for them, actually, it's really quite reasonable that they want to know. And I found that for some children, talking through the day is great. For other children, like you said, they forget, it's a bit overwhelming. So just simple terminology like now we're doing this and next we're doing this.
Yeah, the now next boards are great, and they can also give children some element of choice. Sometimes you can do a now next board where there's the now activities and there's next has got two options and they can choose one of the two, if it's appropriate for them to do that. And that could be for some children that's like having a little reward for something they've done something really, they've had a really good go at an activity, so they get a choice of reward next and they can choose the next thing. And if they're in a reception class, for example, they might have, there's a lot more choice about the activity they might engage with anyway, because there's a lot more sort of play-based learning anyway. So they can perhaps have a now next where they choose one of the next two activities they want to do, so that they feel a sense of choice, but it's not overwhelming. Because again, too many choices for our children, they just don't know, they can't make a decision sometimes, or they try and make a decision they think that you want them to make. That sounds right for you, and it can be a bit of a mess. So yeah, no, go back to those visual timetables. Sometimes again, depending on what they can manage, they might just need a little visual timetable for that lesson, because it might be that for some children to break it down to each little bit of a lesson is what they need to cope with. For some, they can cope with one that lasts for the morning and then another one for the afternoon, or some children can manage the one with the whole day. So it just depends on how much guidance they need during those sort of little changes throughout the day. But yeah, predictability is so important.
Think we get that a lot in secondary schools. So, like, the whole week is run on a timetable. You might have a fortnightly timetable, and it's normally glued in a student's planner so that they can navigate and get to the correct lessons in the correct order. But I think, as well as kind of giving them a structure for the day, it also helps them to see that even if there's something coming up that they're not particularly keen on, it's finite and there will be something
Mm.
afterwards. So I know we're going to think a little bit more about how we can manage like transitions in a school day and kind of go, things that can help during those times. But actually, just knowing that something that you don't like does have an end point can help lessen that anxiety a little bit, because it's not a whole day of maths, it's just an hour, and there will be something fun afterwards. So, yeah, that can.
Oh, I mean, maths is fun. Come on, don't undersell it.
I love it, but I absolutely love it, but not everyone does.
So I think we've kind of already started to touch on it, but we've got our children to school however we've needed to do that. We might be on time, we might not be, but they're at school and we've managed that transition. For primary and secondary, I imagine this is really quite different. But what transitions might our children then go through whilst they're at school? And how can we help them and help school to help them? It's a very big question.
It is. It is. Well, from a secondary perspective, there's going to be a lot of transitions. Like I say, because we have the timetables, then you can kind of get an image of what the day is going to look like. Lessons can last from about 45 minutes up to about an hour and 10 maybe, and children can have 4, 5, 6, 7 lessons in a day, and then you've got your break times, you've got lunchtime. There's a lot of moving around, and it's usual in secondary school that the children do the moving, so they will move from classroom to classroom, sometimes with the same people, but if they're going into a subject that's setted or grouped in any way, they could be with different people who they weren't with in the last lesson. So yeah, there's a lot of changing, and each change is going to come with its own like pattern, as it were. So some teachers like students to line up outside the classroom. Some say that they can go in straight away and find their seats, get their books out, and start without them. Sometimes teachers have to move as well. So children might be arriving at a classroom when there's no teacher there. But those hallways that they're navigating are very hustly and bustly. I think that's probably a
Hmm.
nice word. There's a lot of children moving, and that can be quite intimidating and can make a lot of children very, very anxious. We see so many children come in year seven and they are very worried about these transitions. And over time, that does alleviate for the vast majority of them, but for some, those concerns really do persist. I think it's really important to talk to your child, and that sounds silly, but just to talk to them and find out what is it that's making them anxious. If it's just the sheer noise and the sheer amount of people that are in the corridors, and that is what is kind of making it very difficult for them, then talk to the school, and they might be allowed to leave their lessons 5 minutes early so that they can navigate their way to their next class in a quieter environment. That was a fairly standard thing that I've done for many, many children, is just allowing them the time to walk around the school when it's a bit quieter, and that helped many. It might be that the thing that's causing them anxiety is being late. They might have to trek from one side of the class, one side of the school to the other side of the school, and they always arrive last, and they're worried about being told off. But actually, a quick note to the teacher just to say, look, they have to walk a long way during this transition. It's making them really, really anxious. If they're late, can you just not comment on it? Can you just welcome them in? That will be absolutely fine. Some children I've worked with, they like to have seats that were near the door, so I changed my seating plan to manage that. And what that meant was that they could just slip in unnoticed. So if they were a little bit late, or perhaps they needed a break, maybe they needed to go and find an adult to go and talk to, any of that, they could come into the class when they were ready, and it was relatively unnoticeable for everyone else because they were cracking on with their work. So that can be done as well. Um, we've also arranged buddies to help children do that transition. So a buddy could be a child in their class, someone who's a friend, the same age as them, and they can buddy up and do each transition together. But it's also sometimes been a staff member. Sometimes there are teaching assistants available who can just do some of the big transitions with them. So they've got someone that they can walk with, because that's the other thing, is actually many of these schools are really big, and a lot of children find the transitions difficult because they get lost, and it's okay. A teacher's not going to shout at them for getting lost, but if they want an adult there to help them, then that would be absolutely fine. And I've spoken before about, like, quiet rooms and nurture rooms, and actually, if a child is finding transition times difficult, then go to the library or go to a quiet space. Go and find their adult they feel safe and secure with, and take the time they need to make that transition. Ideally, every teacher would say they want all their children there on time, punctual, but we know it doesn't happen like that. And what we actually want is for them to be in the room when they're ready at some point, so that they can make the most of the learning. They're not going to do that in this state of anxiety. So anything they need to manage that transition is going to be okay.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that primary is so different to that. Because of course
I bet.
they're just in one. They've got one base, generally speaking. I mean, I have to say, I did work in a school once where we did move around. We did have a slight timetable. It was a bit of an outlier. But anyway, typically primary schools have a classroom. That's your base, and so the transitions should be a little bit easier to manage. But as I say, those things like the visual timetable can help with understanding what's going on that day. I think key points of the day for children at primary school, generally when it becomes less structured, so playtimes just after playtime, and particularly lunch times, that's a massive part of the day when it can be difficult. Um, so something that can help again is from a parent's point of view, there's a limit to what you can do, because once they're in school, really, the school has to try and manage, don't they, and make sure things are as therapeutic and as calm and as welcoming as they can be. But I suppose from a parent's point of view, it's quite nice to say to the school things that your child really likes, things that they're interested in, because one thing that can often help children to manage those transitions, particularly, let's say, after a playtime, when they're feeling a bit buzzing and a bit, they might have had a nice time possibly on the face of it, but they also might be feeling quite anxious and not ready to learn yet. So something like a transitional activity could be helpful, where it's a little job, saying job in inverted commas. So you might have a little job like, oh, their job is to go and water some plants. Might not need watering, but hey, who cares? They might need some pencils that need sharpening. There's always those little jobs that are kind of mindless in a sense, but help you to regulate. Don't take more than a few minutes, and by the time they've done that, they can then the class will be calm. They'll hopefully be feeling calm and then ready to learn if they sort of slip into the lesson a bit more. So sometimes that can help. Just those little points in the day where they have something just to do to help them regulate themselves.
I really like that, and that would work in a secondary school as well. So something like handing out the worksheets or um, getting the equipment out. So many of the lessons are practical. So actually having a little job, if you can communicate that to the teacher, they would find it useful to not be sat down straight away. They need a little task to kind of settle themselves in the room. Then that could translate into secondary schools quite easily.
Mm. Yeah, because I think a lot of children like that. Again, a lot of our children need a sense of control. It can often
Yeah.
be very important to them. So that's one thing they can control. It's their thing as well. It's their job to do this thing, and it makes them feel important and useful and needed. And all those messages are really important too. So yeah, I think it can have a lot of benefits. So that's something the school might not necessarily know. And so as a parent, you could also let them know they're really good at love to do jobs, love to help. I think a lot of the time that is the case with a lot of children at that age.
Have either of you got any tips about that transition into unstructured times? Because I know that for a lot of our children, kind of that free for all playtime, lunchtime can be really difficult. So, how can you help them transition into and out of that time? Do you have any suggestions of what schools can do?
That's a cracking question. I think thinking back on my teaching career, I've probably taught quite a few children who did struggle going into that unstructured time. And the way that I would recognize that as a teacher is they would probably hang around at the end of the lesson, be a little bit unwilling to leave. Um, Normally, they wanted to have a little bit of a chat. Um, and and I think it's probably worth identifying what they find difficult about that time. Is it the lack of routine? Is it the fact that they don't really have people to go and play with? Maybe it's the noise, the environment, and maybe they're having a bit of a sensory overload. Because if we can kind of unpick what it is they find difficult about those times, then we can offer strategies that would help them. Um, Again, I go back to these quiet rooms, and many children don't like going to the quiet rooms, but for some, they are a real sanctuary in a school, and they are open during break times, so they can go and be with other people who also prefer a quieter environment, prefer a little bit of a stiller environment, and all of that. And it can also help them to buddy up and make friends with people rather than just standing on a cold playground with everyone being quite boisterous. Um, Sometimes, well, lots of secondary schools offer, not so much during the break time because it's a bit short, but during lunch times they offer clubs. And that would be also something that I'd probably want to talk to my little one about and say, okay, so what's going on in the school during this time? Is there an art club? Is there a reading club? Is there a chess club? And many people or many students used to attend these groups not to do the activity, but just because it gave them a bit of structure during quite a long and structured period. So they can always go and not do the activity. They can always just go and be with other people who are. And sometimes that can give them a bit of structure as well.
I like a lot of that. I think a lot of that would be just as applicable to primary setting, definitely. Again, having those key people to talk to. Yeah, we did run a called a games club at lunchtime, and that's again not unusual in primary schools. If again, as long as you've got staff that can run it, they wouldn't run it the entire time, so you generally run it towards the second half of lunchtime. So most people have had something to eat by that stage, and it's that last bit of the lunchtime half an hour where they find it difficult to manage. So knowing that they can go there is often really good. And that tends to be a sort of a club that's run by invitation only rather than just a free for all, because you'll get children there probably don't need to be, or they want to go because it's a bit cold. That's not really the reason they've been there. They're there because they find it hard to manage. And so it was run by a member of sports staff, did a brilliant job. They had nice, quiet, calming activities to do. And if, because it was open to children from different year groups, if the one particular child didn't feel they had any friends or they knew it in that group, of course they could bring someone with them. We always say you can choose a friend to come with you, you can play together. you could choose different friends each day if that's what you want to do, because quite often other friends would want to have their turn to have a go. So yeah, there's lots of things like that can really help them. And that, of course, they'd then go from there straight into the afternoon. And tell you what, the difference was a massive. It was great. They came in ready, calm, had a nice time, and didn't have any of the issues that might have arisen from being out on the playground, feeling a bit lost.
It's a bit of a random thought and not necessarily related to what we were just talking about, but something you were saying reminded me of what it was like to experience a wet break or a wet lunch in a secondary school. So when the weather is so bad that students weren't allowed to go out and play, and those times, like on reflection, I think could be very, very difficult for children who struggle with transitions or struggle in the school environment because it's very noisy, very, very noisy. And a lot of students don't get the opportunity to like burn off that pent up energy that they have and they need to run off before they
Mm,
go back to the next lesson. So it just popped into my head, and it might just be worth having a word with your child. What are the arrangements for a wet break or a wet lunch? You know, is there a place that you can go to? Because normally what happens is there are allocated classrooms, but then the children aren't allowed out of those classrooms. They can be quite overwhelming
mm.
for some. I think many children do struggle, so it might just be worth checking with them what the arrangements are and making sure they have a place to go to that they feel
Yeah,
comfortable in. It doesn't happen often, but it's always a bit difficult for some. So
So, what about moving to new classes within school? So, I'm thinking of, moving from year one to year two to year three. You've got it down with one academic year, and then come kind of July and then September, we're moving, swapping, and changing. What can we do?
yeah. This is a thing that causes a lot of people anxiety as they start to get towards the summer term. People start worrying, and I say lots of people talk about the parents and the children here. Um, And actually, the schools too. I will say first of all that behind the scenes, there's a lot of agonising going on in terms of how they're going to choose which children go in which class and which teacher to put them in with. And sometimes it's difficult where there might be a teacher leaving and they've got to try and recruit somebody else to come in, and that might be a new teacher that comes into that class. But there's a lot of that work goes on there to try and balance things out. Clearly, if you're in a school where there's only one class per year group, there's not a choice. Your class stays the same. But if they can move them around, sometimes they do, because it quite often help to mix things around a little bit. Um, Particularly, you might find some children that were in a class, particularly in the early years, you realise that they perhaps weren't best in that same class together. They might need splitting up, and so you can give that opportunity to do things like that. But anyway, there's a lot of that work goes in the background. But the next thing is considering how to manage that process. You really should have a sort of program of support to help them. Now, the schools will have lots of things in place, and again, they should be able to they should be communicating that to the parents. And it might be that what they do is enough for your child, but it might be that they need something extra. And again, that's absolutely fine. And lots of children will need that, and probably the school would quite like a conversation with parents about what they think. Here's some ideas. What do you think? How do you think your child will cope if we do these things a little bit different? So there's lots of things you can do, like visiting the new class quite a lot of the time. Once they know who it is, they can start visiting the new classroom before. And that could be in the school day, but sometimes it might be nice to visit them after the school day with you. As a parent, you might want to come around and see, because it could be a little bit less busy, a little less sort of intimidating perhaps, so that they give them extra visits to get to meet the staff. And the staff often come to the current class and say hello, and that can be also a lovely thing for them to do to help just feel a sense of familiarity. The good thing about a primary school is, generally speaking, the children will know the other people, even if they don't know them very well. They'll have seen them around; they're not as complete strangers. So the other staff that they're going to go to see will be someone they've hopefully met before and seen around and about. So it's a case of just trying to develop those relationships as early as possible and begin to help them feel that they're welcome and they feel trusted. And schools will try, if possible, if they've got, let's say, a member of support staff that's working quite a lot with a child. So sometimes there's a member of staff, like a support member of staff, that works a lot with your child. If that's the case, then the school might decide that they need to keep that person with your child in their next class, so that you've got a point of contact who is already familiar, and that can be really helpful in managing that step across. there's lots of other things that can happen as well. Again, I think really important is, like we said before, about talking to your child and asking them to say, is it anything that's worrying them? What is it that might be making you feel a bit worried or scared, if they are? If there's any signs that they're feeling anxious, if they're able to tell you, then that's great. And they might tell you stuff at home. Things can come out at all different times of the day and night, can't they? They can be blurted out when they sort of come bursting out of them if they've been trying to hold on to their worries. But if you've got anything that they're little worried about, then that's the point. That's the point at which to tell the school about what's going on, because it helps them to understand where your child's coming from. If you can, depending on if the child's willing to, they might be happy to tell you stuff. If you say, "I'm going to help," if you let me know, I can tell the school some things that are worrying you a bit, and I'm going to help you to help you to feel better. I know there's things like worry monsters that a lot of people use. I know that we've used that before at home, and that was really nice to be able to put the worries in the worry monster's mouth. And it's almost about help the child to take the worries out of themselves and put them somewhere so they can. So it stops becoming something that makes them feel so anxious inside all the time.
And sometimes it can be really small things that do make children feel quite anxious. I was working with a family last year, and actually, the little lad was really worried because he didn't know where he was going to put his bag. He didn't know how he was going to get to break time. And so, what we did in that instance was, because many schools, they have the facility for taking photos and sharing them. So the teacher, I mean, he did get to visit the new classroom, but they just also took some photos of the new classroom so that over the summer holidays he could look back at it and say, right, well, that was where I'm going to put my bag. That's the door that I go through in order to get to the playground. And just having that kind of reminder over the summer holidays helped him to kind of feel less anxious because he could see what it was going to
Mm.
look like. And then the other thing that we did in that instance was the new teacher. She was wonderful. She was very accommodating, and she just sent him a couple of emails over the summer holiday, which said, "Oh, I'm really looking for. I hope you're having a nice time. I'm really looking forward to teaching you next year." And obviously, maybe not every teacher would do that. I would hope that the vast majority would. But it takes 5 minutes to send an email, and if you think that's something that's going to help your little one, it's worth asking whether they would
Yeah,
mind. So
I guess like we said earlier, it's about being held in someone's mind, so you've been remembered.
yeah,
That's lovely. Yeah, what you said about the photos, that's a really important thing, because a lot of schools do this, and it's good practice as a general strategies for supporting transition, because not just our children, but children in general quite often find transition a bit of a worry. So it's quite normal for, and certainly again at primary schools, to produce a little photo book of their new class, which will include pictures of the classroom, particular areas they need to know about, the staff members that are going to be in that team, so that they know who they are. And sometimes they put a little bit of a bio underneath about things they like. I've got 3 cats, and I love going running, or whatever they might say. And it's just nice to have that. They can keep that over the summer and coming back to it when they need to. If they don't produce that as a matter of routine, I would hope they produce it at least for the children that they think need it. And I would also, as a parent, perhaps just check to see if they do that. In the same manner, you can also do something in reverse. You can get your child to do something for the staff, because they might like that. It might be something the child quite likes. Things I want them to know about me. So if they want to know, they might be capable of drawing a little picture themselves and writing a little bit. They might not. They might want a photo of themselves, and you help write it based on what they want you to know, to tell the school. So again, that's another thing where the child at least has a sense of control, a bit of something they can contribute to the process, and that might help them feel a bit less anxious about it. Yes, there's a again, it's about sort of finding out what your child needs and adapting where you can.
yeah. And I was just thinking about secondary schools whilst you've been talking, Jason, and I'm not sure secondary schools handle transitions as well as a matter of course as primary schools. I don't think it's something that we pay so much attention to, and maybe it's just the schools that I've worked in, so I don't want to tar all secondary schools with the same brush here. But I don't think as much work goes into the transitional period as perhaps it does with younger children. And therefore, if it's going to be something that you think is going to be a source of anxiety for your child, I think it's really worth being proactive in a secondary school. In the next academic year, they're likely to have a lot of changes of teachers.
Yeah,
There might be 12 or 13 new teachers, and it is incredibly unlikely that they are going to, as a matter of course, get to meet all of them before the summer holidays. I would hope they'd have an opportunity to meet their new form tutor. Um, but again, that's not always organised. So it might be a case of, if you think this is going to be a big thing for your child, contact the school. And I would do it, probably after the May holiday. You probably don't need to do it earlier than that, but after the May holiday, get in contact with them, say it's going to be a source of stress, ask if you could possibly come in one afternoon after school, and walk around and meet the new teachers, the new classrooms. There should be a member of staff that will facilitate that for you. But yeah, it's worth being proactive, because if you wait until the last week or the last couple of weeks, it might be a little bit too late to get it organised. And I don't think we can rely on them to definitely do an in-depth transition
Mm.
um, before the summer holidays. So yeah, be proactive. They'll be happy to organise. They'll be happy to facilitate it, but it might be more onus on parents.
Mm. There's another idea as well, I thought, that could come from a parent, which is, we talked about transitional objects earlier on. It can also work from transition as well in this situation. So it might be appropriate for the new class teacher, or even the old one, or both, to provide some sort of little transitional object for the child to look after over the summer holidays, ready to bring in after that. So again, it helps them feel that they're wanted and belonged. And if a new teacher gives the child something to look after, it's a sense of trust. It's a sort of gesture, isn't it, of saying, I trust you here. This is important to me. It's a thing that's.
Yeah.
Can you please look after? I know you will do. Make sure it was a lovely holiday. Like a little soft toy, for example, that you could take around with you. But that might work. It might not. It's something that some schools would. I'm sure they'd try it if you felt it was something that you think your child would need.
I was also just thinking about, we were talking about little jobs earlier,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and that can be a really good way to get to meet the new teachers. So again, if you kind of contact the school and say, my little one does need to meet their teachers, they do, then actually, the current maths teacher can always ask a child to, oh, could you take these calculators to Mr. Brown, please, for me? And that gives them an opportunity to go and meet Mr. Brown, who is their maths teacher for next year. And
Mhm.
little things like that can be woven into the school day. But again, it might be a parent that needs to ask for it rather than it being done as a matter of course.
What about that transition to a new school? So I guess really I'm thinking of from primary to secondary. You and Jason, maybe you can offer some advice about how we can ask primary schools to help us with that. And Lisa, how kind of as the new receiving school, what conversations could we be having?
Wow, this is big, isn't it? This is a thing that definitely plays on parents' minds. In fact, I've had so many conversations with parents in the past that say the child's going into year 5, thinking, "Oh my goodness, it will be long before they're in secondary school." Just don't wish it away. It's got 2 years yet, but it's obviously something that plays in their mind because it's big. It feels big, and it represents a big change in the life, doesn't it? So it can feel scary, even though it may not be in reality. It's again, it's a bit like we said earlier about trying to remain positive and trying to keep that calm face on for the sake of our child. Because if we start showing fear, it's telling that child this is something to worry about. We want to try and make them feel it's not, or it's not something to worry about too much. It's understandable, and we understand why you'd feel a bit. School. I think the first thing to do, if I was from a parent's point of view, is I want to know what the school does. What are the typical arrangements they have in place for transition now? Usually schools have very good arrangements in place, and they have really good relationships with the school. Usually one school they feed to, sometimes a couple of schools. So there's often a good program that's quite well established, I would hope, and that's generally what I've seen in my experience. So if you're not sure as a parent, I would ask that question. You'll find out eventually. They'll tell you, but you may not want to know partway through year 6. You might want to know in year 5 all the transition arrangements when they get to year 6, if it's something that worries you. So don't worry about asking those questions. So yeah, I would say I made a sort of 5-point list of things I thought I would say to a parent to do. So the first one is, talk to the school about their current arrangements for transition and see whether you feel that those would be enough for your child, what they do, because lots of it involves special visits to the school. They have activity days. So the secondary school often put on a fun day of whatever, some particular subject, or it might be a project. They make a building project. They do some teamwork where they invite children from the different primary schools on the same day to come over and do something together. Because apart from anything else, it helps the children to mix and begin to meet other children that they're going to find as potential new friends. Again, it's quite a big, I suppose from some children's point of view, it could be quite a scary prospect, but they actually are lovely days. They'll often send, primary schools often send key members of staff with those children, especially those ones that need someone with them. So if your child's one that was going to struggle, then the school would probably send somebody with them that they know who could stay with them during the day and reassure them and be there and support through that process. There's lots and lots of discussions that go on behind the scenes between the schools about the children individually. So they talk to the staff, meet face to face. Just and typically, what happens, I don't know where every school does this, but typically what would happen is the staff in the year 6 team would meet the staff in the year 7 team who are coming up, and they would talk about each child, just about their likes, their dislikes, their friendships, the people to avoid, people, anything that might need to know that makes that child tick to help them understand them. So that's something you can't do much about as a parent, but it's good to know it's happening. I would also find out, the second thing I'd say is find out if the school does lots of additional visits to secondary school. And if you think your child needs them, then by all means ask for them. Again, it's quite typical for a group of children within the primary school to be identified as needing extra visits for all kinds of reasons. They might have additional needs, they might need to meet key members of staff, whatever. And again, those can easily be arranged where the children go, perhaps in groups of 2s or 3s or on their own, to the secondary school to visit particular members of staff that they might want to get to know, because those members of staff might be key members of staff for them when they're in the secondary school. They might be part of a nurture team or pastoral support team, for example. They might be part of the support team if they've got additional needs. So those additional visits are really important, and they often happen. So I would, again, just check if that's something that the schools do, if you're not sure. And if you feel your child needs them, ask for your child to be included if they haven't already. I would also definitely want to know, is there a point of contact from the secondary school that you could have as a parent? I would perhaps ask, who do you think I could talk to? Who do you think were the best person I could speak to? And it might be the head of the year, it might be the Senko, it might, depending on what your child's needs are. There should be a person who can be your point of contact, and I think that's important to have. Now, I would just check if there's going to be a meeting to talk about your child's transition if you feel they need a particular separate discussion for any reason. They might just have that discussion between themselves as professionals, but you may want to know what's discussed, or you may want a little meeting with them perhaps anyway, just to make sure that they understand from your perspective what the child needs. Again, it's perfectly reasonable to ask for. And as we said before, I think the next thing I'd say is, like we said about photo books, they're really important as well. Yeah. Just like they were in a primary school, photos of key areas, key members of staff. And again, if your child can do a photo book all about me, things that I'm interested in, what I like, what I don't like, what makes me happy, what makes me frightened, etc., that could be really good. If they want to do that. Again, some children might not want to do it, some children will want to do it. Some schools do that for all the children. They do something a bit like that anyway, like a passport about me, so they can send them all up. So I would just get in there and start asking the questions if you're a little bit worried about it. Find out what the arrangements are, and then you can see whether what they're going to do is probably enough for your child, or whether you think you might do something a bit different.
I think from a secondary perspective, I just want to reassure parents that a lot of effort goes into planning those transitional days. So when the year sixes come up and they come and explore the school, so they'll have a full program on that day, which is very, very structured, and it's structured so that they get experience of exploring the school, finding out what the routines are for lunch times, meeting key members of staff. And we always make sure we put our warmest and cuddliest members of staff on those days. So if there's anyone who's frightening and not a big fan of the little ones, then they get hidden away in a cupboard or something, because it's important that we present as warm and accepting. So the tasks that they might do, or the activities that they might do, might be a treasure hunt around the school. Again, it's just building familiarity with different rooms and different areas within the school, and allowing them to explore. We don't necessarily make it about academic achievement, and finding out their strengths and weaknesses, because we don't want to put any child off. We don't want to make them feel worried about that step up from year 6 to year 7. Sometimes that's met not very well by parents, because they want to know that their child is going to be challenged when they move to secondary school. But what I would say is, the transitional time isn't the time to to challenge them academically necessarily. It's about making them feel comfortable in the environment, helping them meet some of the teachers, helping them meet some of the children they're going to be in classes with. Also, what happens is when they start in September, every school that I've worked in has made sure that the year sevens are in on their own for that first day, or they might be in with the year 12s. So the school on that very first day is a lot quieter, so they get to explore, they get to find their way around without it being the big hustle and bustle that it can be. So that first day is structured for them as well. Um, we also have a lot of experience of children really struggling in that first week or 2 weeks. And I don't mean struggling in terms of being unhappy, but getting lost, going to the wrong class, not realizing they were supposed to be somewhere at a certain time. And that is really standard, and it's expected. So if they are worried about any of that, just let them know they're going to be met with empathy. They're not going to they're not going to get told off. They do have a settling in period to find their way around and to find out all the new routines. So yeah, it's not expected it's going to be perfect on day one.
That's great. Thank you both. I guess what I'm taking from this is that it's all about communication with the school, what your child needs, what they might find difficult, what helps. Is that the top tip?
Yeah, that definitely comes down to the underneath most of what things we've talked about, doesn't it? I'd agree.
Yeah, 100%.
I think one last thing to say is probably that we need to acknowledge their feelings if they are anxious, and help them to know that it's quite normal. We all have these feelings, and as adults, we might need to give examples of where we felt a bit nervous about a new job or changes, moving house, all sorts of things in our lives that change always cause stress. Because they don't want to feel that their feelings are somehow wrong or unusual, because if we're sailing across looking so calm amongst it all, they're thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling like this? No one else is. Well, we do, but it is actually normal. And sometimes you can relate to examples in your own lives that help your child to understand it is normal. But at the same time, we don't want to just dwell on it so much that it becomes the thing that consumes them. So we've got to find ways of acknowledging it, somehow expressing it, and that goes, like I said before, about making notes about things they're worried about. That time, let me write it down, and I'll make sure we pass it on. Right now, you've almost given that worry away, and it's not long, so you have to carry so much with you anymore.
Also, and this is as an adult, not as a child, but it certainly helped me when I realised that actually, if I am anxious about something, then I might not sleep well the night before. But that's okay. It's not going to make the day horrific. It's not going to make it any worse. I'm still going to lie in bed and make sure I get a good rest. And it's okay to be a little bit anxious. It's okay to not be able to drift off to sleep as normal. But we can. And I was just giggling to myself because you could always share, if you remember, your first day at school. How did you feel about it, and what went well and what wasn't quite so well? What were you worried about that you didn't need to be worried about? All of that. But I'm not sure I can remember my first day. So my first, no,
no idea. So, Jason and Lisa, thank you. You've given us a lot to think about. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to look out for future episodes such as behaviour management, homework, and choosing a school. Don't forget you can contact us at any time with your suggestions, questions, or contributions, or if you fancy joining us as a guest speaker. So you can contact us at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Thanks for listening.